Today we're going to look at making some pretty patterns. Patterns are a great way to fancy up an otherwise simple design, and today we're going to start out by making this little brick pattern, which teaches us some of the basics involved in the tools that we're going to be using, and by the end of it we'll be able to make perfectly seamless, completely tiling patterns like this little floral one here. Let's get into it. The first pattern I thought we might take a look at is a brick pattern. This is a great one if you're making doll houses or book nooks, texture plates for polymer clay, or terrain for your Dungeons and Dragons campaign. The way we're going to make it is by first creating a brick, and then we're going to make copies of it using the array tool. To make our brick, we're going to use the rectangle tool. Click on this one here, then click and drag to make a rectangle. We can change the size of it up here. I'm going to make mine 40 by 20. And if I click off there, then it will set that size. Now, in order to create our copies, we are going to use the array tool. That's this one down here. It basically creates duplicates of our object in a sort of grid pattern. It will create copies of anything you have selected. We still have our rectangle selected because we haven't clicked off it from when we made it, and we can tell that by these little marching ants. But if you ever do accidentally unselect something, or you want to duplicate something that you made earlier and it has this solid line, that means it's not selected. So the way to select it is to go into your selection mode up here, select. You can also hit escape on your keyboard, and then you can click and drag to select it. Or you can just click on the object itself. So once you have what you want to copy selected, you click on the array tool, and you're presented with a whole heap of different options. The first ones I want to draw your attention to are the columns. Adding more columns will create more of them in the horizontal direction, and adding more rows will create more in the vertical direction. You can see that our rows went upwards, and I kind of want them to go downwards. So the way to change that is by just going reverse direction on that row category. You can also do it for the other side, but then it goes off our page even more. But I'm going to do it for the rows here. So reverse direction just changes the direction that you're adding the objects in. The next thing I want to talk to you about is spacing. If I lower the spacing of the columns, you can see that those columns get closer together. You can also do the same for the rows, making the gap larger or smaller. And you can see here that our spacing has the same value, 50, for both sides. But here, it looks like there's a smaller gap between the columns than there is the rows. And that's because we're using a rectangle, which isn't square to begin with, and it's actually measuring the distance from the centers of each of our objects. So it's finding the center of this rectangle and then moving 50 across and placing another rectangle. Moving 50 across and placing another, and it's also moving 50 down and placing more. 50 down again and placing more. When we're making patterns like bricks, we usually want the space between the objects both vertically and horizontally to be the same. And it can be a little bit tricky to work out exactly what that distance should be in between objects if you're measuring from the center of each object. But thankfully, we have this one called padding between edges. And you can see that as I click that button, I'll just do it again, the spacing here changes, even though it doesn't change the picture here. And that's because it's recalculating it so that we're now measuring the actual gap between each object. So it's looking at this gap here and moving it across 10 here on the side, 10. And between here, there is 30. So it's actually the gap in between each objects now, which makes it very easy to put 5 in both of these. And then we have an even gap between both the columns and the rows. Now, it still doesn't quite look like bricks, it's a bit more like tiles or something at the moment, and that's because we have an offset every second row. And the way we do that is by going into our rows and shifting them by half. Now you can see every second row is shifted over by half. And now we have a nice little brick pattern. We can add a few more columns and rows if we want to, just by adding more to these numbers here. And when we're happy with what we've got, we hit OK. And that creates our little brick pattern. Now this is pretty cool as it is. We can put it on stuff, but say we wanted to create a dollhouse with straight edges. At the moment, we have these kind of blank bits on the side. And say I just wanted to use part of this pattern on my object. I can do that. I can create a rectangle, and I'll just draw one in here. Say this is the size I want my dollhouse wall to be, for example. And I will go back into select mode, and I will hold Shift, and I'll also select the bricks. So I've just held Shift and then clicked on the bricks, so you can see both are selected now. And in order to cut the excess bricks away, what we're going to use is called a Boolean modifier. And the Boolean tools, the Boolean modifiers, they basically work on two different objects, and they can perform various actions based on those two objects and the things you choose. They're a bit of a deep topic, and we're not going to dive fully into them in this workshop. There is a bunch of information on our documentation on our website. But today, what we're going to use is this intersection one. And what it basically does is says, LightBurn, give me anywhere where these two objects that I've selected overlap. So we've got our bricks and we've got our rectangle that we just made, and anywhere that they overlap, it's going to keep, and everything else it's going to get rid of. So that's this option here, intersect. And boom, there's our little wall. Now if I preview this, you can see that currently it's engraving the bricks. And that's because I have it set it to fill mode, and it's just filling in all of these enclosed shapes, these little bricks. And that might be what you want if you're making a texture plate for modeling clay, because you'd be pushing it into there, and then when you take the clay off, then the bricks would be sticking out. But generally, if you're using it for something like a dollhouse or a terrain piece in your dungeon, you actually want the bricks to be sticking out, and you want the mortar to be sunk inwards. And at the moment, you'll get the opposite of that. The bricks will be sunk in. So the way to change that is to create another box outside of your bricks. And if we preview that again, you'll see that it's inverted. It's changed that. So the mortar is now the thing that's being engraved away. This box also works if you run it right on the edge. So if I hover over this very top corner, you'll see that my icon changes to little crosshairs, little vertical, horizontal crosshairs. If I click there and drag down to here, to the little crosshairs down here, that will still do the same thing. So now I've just got the little edges. So that's a way you can invert the colors if you want to engrave the opposite of what you currently have. So that's a little brick pattern. We've learnt quite a few things making that one. And I think it might be time for us to jump into something slightly more complex. Now, we're not going to dive deep into creating specific objects from scratch in this topic, because it is quite a deep topic, but there are, thankfully, lots of online resources that give you access to SVGs and vector objects that are free. And one of the great ones is the Noun project. Let's take a little look at that one now. So this is the Noun project. You can find it at thenounproject.com. And here there are many different images and vector objects that people have made, and they have the kind of license that allows you to use them for free, either with attribution or fully Creative Commons. So I'm going to have a little look in here for flowers. And we can find lots of cute little flowers. These ones are rather lovely. Often if you find an artist that makes a couple of nice things, they'll have a whole collection. So I'm going to download these flowers and then import them into LightBurn. Open up here. This is one of the first ones. You can see that it's either free with the subscription, or if we click attribution required, it is $0. Now, if you were using this in a product or for business purposes, you have to link back to this person here. And if we click get this icon and download this SVG, then it will also give us a link that we can use to send people back to this icon here. So it's important to include that if you are using this for business purposes. I am giving you this link right here. So we're covered for today. I'll go ahead and download all of these and then we will bring them into LightBurn. Okay, so back in LightBurn, we're going to bring those flowers in, and the way we do that is with import. So if we go File, Import, that allows us to bring files into our current project. It's different to opening a file. If we were just to open these files, we would no longer have our brick pattern. It would be a whole new project with just that thing in it. We don't want to do that today. We want to bring those flowers into our project. So we're going to use Import. File, Import. So I'm going to bring them in one at a time. Here's our first one. I'll zoom in a bit so we can see them. You can see it has this little attribution. Because I have shown you the link as I went, you'll be able to find these again. So I have attributed it for business purposes correctly. But if you are going to sell these in your projects, then you need to include at least this little statement, but better the link in your projects. But I'm going to remove them here for now, and I'm going to import the rest of them just that same way. File, import, bring in the rest. So here we have those flowers that I've imported, and you'll notice that if I try and click and drag them, they're actually made up of lots of different pieces. And we're going to be moving these around a bit, and we want to be able to keep each of these flowers kind of all together. We can go ahead and like group them, but it can be a little tricky to select just individual flowers if you've done what I've done and kind of gathered them all together. But there is a handy little tool called Auto Group. If we select them all just by clicking and dragging, and I've dragged that box all the way around the outside of all of them, see that? They're all selected, and then we go to Arrange, Auto Group. That will group anything that is inside another shape with its outermost shape, which works for these shapes because all these shapes have a big outline that goes all the way around them. See that? Ooh, all the way around. So now each of these shapes is just one, or each of these flowers is just one little group for us, so we can move them around nice and easily. Alrighty, so we have some flowers here as our little assets that we're going to use to create our pattern. And the way we're going to start is by selecting a few of them. I'm going to arrange just a couple of these, maybe, I don't know, these 4. They look kind of cute. Oh, I might pick this one. I like this one. Okay, so we've got these 4 here. And I'm going to select them like we did before with our little brick. And we're going to click Create an Array. And this time, I'm going to make some more columns like we did before and some more rows. I might turn that shift by half off just to make it a bit easier for ourselves. And I'll get the spacing kind of where I want it to be. There we go. And that's already looking pretty good. But say we wanted to make a few refinements to it, what we can do is create what's called a virtual array. And this is a style of array that is basically not fully confirmed. I'll show you here. Let's create a virtual array. You'll see that these turn grey. And if I hit OK, now I can't actually select any of those copies. But that's okay because we can work on that later. What this allows us to do is actually make changes that are reflected through all the copies. So as I change this object here, it changes all the others as well. And if I change this one here, there we go, got another change. Kind of like this one, just where it is. We bring this one in a little bit and that one over a little bit. There we go. That's quite a nice little pattern we've got going on. Now you can see I have some little white spaces here. Say I wanted to fill some of those in, like maybe I want to add a few little dots just to be kind of cute. I will, maybe that one's a bit big. Copy one of these. And I'll put them on the same layer so that they're engraved. Oops, switch these all to black as well. You'll notice that these dots aren't copied over. They're not copied into all the other ones. And that's because they weren't part of our original virtual array, but we can add them in. If I select the things I want to add, then hold Shift with my keyboard and select at least one of the things that are already in the array, I can right-click that object and go Add to Array. And now it adds those extra selections in to all our copies. So I might do that a little bit more. Grab a few more of these. Put some more dots up here. And another few maybe here. Couple more here. And some up here. Maybe like that. This might be one too many, maybe we'll move one there. And maybe a couple here. Somewhere around there. Okay, if I select that whole area, I can just go Add to Array. It will add all the new ones. And you can see it bumped it all over, and that's because I've actually added more objects here on the side. And so I've actually changed the size of our shapes. So if we don't want this white space going on here, we can fix that. We can go back into that virtual array and change the settings that we had there before. So if I click on one of the things in our array and right click and go Edit Array, it will bring that screen back up for us. I might move it over here so we can see the copies. So I can reduce the spacing between those columns again. And now, I might even reduce this just a tad more. Oh no, look better like that. So this pattern is looking pretty good. I'm going to change it to fill mode and have a little preview of it. Yeah, that's looking really cute. I think we've done well. So I really like this. I think I'm going to want to use it in projects in future. And at the moment, it being in a virtual array is really great for editing because as we move things around, it gets reflected elsewhere. But I don't want that for the future projects. I want to keep this just as it is. So what we can do is select our little pieces of our virtual array and right-click them and go Flatten Array. And that will give us just those standard copies like we had in our brickwork. So these are all their own little objects again. And that will be really handy for us as we try to make this into a perfect little pattern. So what we want to do now is find a perfect little square of this pattern that we can save as a tiling pattern. So we want to find an exact little bit that can be duplicated either side, up and down, and it will perfectly replicate this pattern. And the best way to do that is to find a nice repeatable point like this one in here. This is a good little point in here, and draw a box between that point as it repeats throughout the pattern. So we're going to go between all these 4 points. I'm going to draw it with a square here. It has to be the exact same spot on the exact same motif. So I'm going to zoom right in, click there, zoom out again, find it over here, like that, and down here, this is the point here, and over here as well, like that. And if you've done it right, this box should be exactly square. You shouldn't have any weird angles going on either direction. It should be a perfect little rectangle. Otherwise, you haven't picked the exact same points on the exact same motif. So go back and try again. I've put this on a tool layer here. And that's because what we're going to do is use this to be kind of like a border around our little shape here. We're going to do a similar thing to what we did before with the intersection, but we also want to keep a copy of this border because it will be handy for future reference. This is on a tool layer. If you were drawing on a different color, just select that little box and click one of these tool layers, either T1 or T2. These layers will never be output to your machine. They are purely for designing. They're great as guidelines or little reference points. They'll never actually be cut or engraved on your machine, so they're really useful for that. I'm going to make a copy of our box because if you remember before when we ran that intersection, it actually deleted our box as part of that intersection, but I want to be able to keep this box. So I'm going to right click it and go duplicate. So now there are two again. Again, a little hard to see because they're on top of each other, but if I pull one out, you can see that there are two. So I've done that, and I'm going to select all our shapes, which these have come undone. That's okay. If your shapes are all individuals, it's not a huge problem. What we can do is turn off that tool layer. So this is in the show column. So I'll turn it back on again, turn it off so we can't see it. Select all of our shapes, right click them and go group. Now when I click on any of them, they'll all be selected, which is what we want in order to be able to do that Boolean intersection like we did with the bricks. So I'm going to go show again on our tool layer. I'm going to select our flowers and I'm going to hold shift and click so that I've selected just one of those boxes. A little bit hard to see, but again, if I move it around, you can see that I've just got one and one stays where it is. I'll just undo that. So now we're going to do that Boolean intersection, just like we did before with the bricks. Boolean intersect. And there you go, it's deleted everything but what was exactly in our box. So now, if we select the result and go into virtual array, create a few copies. Actually, we might turn virtual array off, so we just get a normal array. And we set the padding between edges to have a 0 spacing. 0, 0 with padding between edges. You'll see that our pattern is a perfect repeat again. If we turn that tool layer off, it's even more obvious. And that is really, really useful. Now what we can do is, I'll just undo that, go edit, undo a few times or hit Control Z to get back to here. Now we can save that piece to our art library. The art library isn't on by default, so you have to open it by going Window, Art Library, and it will pop up on the side here. And it's a great way to save graphics and designs and images that you want to use again. If you've never used it before, you'll have to create a new library to store things in. So go New, and I'm going to pop it in this folder here, and I'm going to call it Patterns. So I have a new library, and I can select this and go Import Graphic from Project. And I'll call this Flowers. And now, if I start a brand new, might pop this art library down over here. I like putting it here because it doesn't take up so much room. Now, I'll just save this document and open a brand new one. File, save, file, new. Then I've got a whole new document, totally blank, but I can put these from my art library into my document. I can run that really simple grid array with the 0 spacing, so I don't need to remember the spacing I had on it before, and I'll be able to use it in any project I please. So there you have it, pretty patterns in LightBurn. We make a lot of documentation. We also have a YouTube channel with weekly videos, both long form ones and little quick tips that are like 90 seconds long. And these also go out on the socials. So if you want to follow along and find more tips about using LightBurn, that's a great way to do it. If you get stuck at all with any of this, we have a support email. I'll pop that up on the screen now. And we also have a community forum where you can ask other people who use LightBurn how to do certain things. So please reach out if you have any worries. Happy burning!